I'm Steve Rasmussen. I'm with the Nebraska Forest Service, which is part of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. I'm a district forester and also the curator for the Northeast Arboretum here at the Haskell Ag Lab. Today I'm going to give you a quick introductory virtual tour of the Arboretum so that you can see what type of plants we have growing here and encourage you to come back and visit. The Northeast Arboretum is an affiliate site of the Nebraska Statewide Arboretum. The Nebraska Statewide Arboretum is a statewide system of affiliated sites across the state to represent different climates. You can find out more about Nebraska Statewide Arboretum by visiting plantnebraska.org or Google search Nebraska Statewide Arboretum. The Northeast Arboretum became an arboretum about 30 years ago. Garden clubs started planting some trees on Arbor Day, and we continued that tradition and kept planting different types of species of trees and shrubs. Now we have close to 100 different trees and shrubs labeled for identification purposes here at the Haskell Ag Lab. We have a dispenser that if you come during hours when we are not open, you can pull out an information sheet and walk yourself around the grounds and find the different types of trees that we have planted. The first unique tree I want to show you here at the Northeast Arboretum is the Dawn Redwood. It is one of 3 redwoods in North America that are planted. It's not native to North America. The other 2 are the coastal redwood and the giant sequoia out in California. The Dawn Redwood is actually from China. It is considered a living fossil. They have found fossils of this tree back thousands of years ago in North America, actually in the Badlands of North Dakota and up into Canada. So it has been around a long time. The unique thing about this tree is it is a deciduous conifer. It'll drop its needles in the fall. They'll turn a bright yellow color and drop off after about 2 weeks. And then in the spring, it'll leaf out with real light lime green colored needles. And so it's a unique tree in that it's considered a conifer, and yet it also drops its needles. The needles are fairly flat and fan-shaped, and so the fossil showings that they find look just like that. The next tree we have to show is the Cannon Fir. This is a variety of balsam fir. It's found in a valley in West Virginia, is how it gets its name. I chose this tree to represent the over 14 different types of true conifers that we have growing here at the Arboretum. It's a good alternative for the spruces that are often overplanted in landscapes. It should be planted in a protected area. This tree is about 8 years old now. It grows about 8 to 10 inches a year. Has very fragrant needles and branches. So when I'm out here working at the Arboretum at the end of the day, sometimes I'll take a small clippings off the tree, crush it up, take it with me in the truck, and I have my automatic immediate air freshener. The next unusual tree here at the Arboretum that we wanted to showcase is the little walnut. And this is related to the black walnut that we have growing in Nebraska. But this tree actually gets nuts that are about the size of a marble, a large marble. So quite a bit smaller than our black walnut seeds that we see dropping in the fall around here. This tree is native into Texas and Oklahoma, the southern part of Kansas. So it's unusual to have it up this far north that can survive our winters. This tree is about 15 to 20 years old. It consistently has little walnuts on it. It's already started the walnuts. And this is the size of the walnut, not the size of a large marble. And this is as large as it will get. So the husk will come off, and then there'll be a smaller nut size that's inside the husk. So it's a unique tree in that it doesn't grow very much in this area. I don't know of more than a handful that are maybe in northeast Nebraska, and yet it produces these small nuts every year. It's surprising. The nuts that fall on the ground, the squirrels and the mice still go after the tiny bit amount of nut meats that are in here. The next plant I have to show here at the Northeast Arboretum isn't a tree. I decided to throw in a shrub in this virtual tour because we have a number of different shrubs represented here. And I chose this shrub to represent that group because of the neat flowers and the actually seed heads that are actually maturing right now, the middle of July. This is called a button bush. It's native to eastern Nebraska. It grows very well. It will grow to be about maybe 12 to 15 feet tall. So it's a very large shrub. It fills in a landscape very well. The neat thing about this shrub that I like the most, though, is the buttons that are produced, is how it gets its name, button bush. If you can see the buttons on the shrub in the back, and this button here, it's real fluffy and almost the size of a ping pong ball. So it makes me think of the little trees that are in the story of the Lorax, where they've got the little puffy balls on them. And you can see down here, they're in different stages of maturity. This one a little bit more mature. So button bush, a native to Nebraska. The next tree we have to showcase on our virtual tour of the Northeast Arboretum is the shellbark hickory. And I chose the shellbark hickory because it's also known as the king nut among the hickory groupings. It gets to be a very large nut. The husk will split open into 4 shelves, and then also the seed inside is a very large seed. Hard shell, so it is hard to crack, but people do make use of the nut meats also, and definitely the wildlife do. Our trees here are about 15 to 20 years old. They're just starting to produce seeds now. This is a maturing seed that is growing, and it'll develop into a seed this size by the end of the summer. Your hickories have compound leaves, so this is one leaf with leaflets attached to that leaf. So the shellbark hickory also gets its name because the bark on the tree starts sloughing off. There's also a shagbark hickory that even has shaggier bark that starts to exfoliate. So during the winter it has a lot of neat characteristics on it also, because you can see the bark better. So we have 7 different kinds of hickories represented here at the Northeast Arboretum. Shellbark is one of them. The next tree we have to show you is the persimmon tree. I chose the persimmon tree to represent the fruit tree collection that we have here at the Haskell Ag Lab. We have about 18 to 20 different types of fruit trees showcased. Apples, pears, cherries, peaches, apricots, and also the more unique tree like persimmon, to show the different types of fruits that can be grown in this area and you can utilize in the fall. Persimmon tree has a couple unique characteristics. One is the bark on the persimmon tree is described as an alligator skin. And as you look close to the bark, it's really deep furrowed and looks somewhat like the back of an alligator. So if you're walking through the woodlands, say in southeast Nebraska, where this tree is native, in the wintertime, and you saw a tree with that type of stem, you'd be able to identify it as a persimmon tree. Another unique thing about the persimmon tree is the fruit that it produces. The fruit is, when mature, is about the size of a plum. It is just now starting to grow the fruit. The flowers have bloomed. So this tree will produce fruit just about every year. The persimmon flowers late enough in the spring to where usually the spring frosts don't hurt the flowers, and they can still mature into fruit. The fruit is a very tasty fruit after a hard freeze. You don't want to eat this fruit before the fruit goes through a hard freeze. It's a very astringent, bitter taste, but after a hard freeze it turns to be a very sweet flavor. In fact, the Latin name for persimmon represents fruit of the gods, or nectar of the gods, referring to the sweetness of the fruit. And then the final thing about the persimmon that I like to talk about is the use of the wood. And I went to my golf bag this morning and pulled out my vintage club. This is a 3-wood. It's a true wood driver because the head of it is made with persimmon wood. And back before the synthetic heads were made, persimmon was the main wood that was used for the drivers on golf clubs. Very hard wood, and it just gives that nice solid thump when you have a good drive off the tee box. Another unique tree we have here at the Northeast Arboretum, located east of the Haskell Ag Lab, is the chestnut trees. And we have horse chestnut, Chinese chestnut, American chestnut, different types, but the one I wanted to show today is the Chinese chestnut, because this tree gets a very good edible nut meat that you can either roast or you can chop up and use in dressings in the fall and any type of cooking uses like that. Chinese chestnut is being planted more commonly than the American chestnut now. Back in the early 1900s, chestnut blight came through, killed most of the native American chestnuts that were growing in the eastern hardwood forests. The Chinese chestnut is resistant to chestnut blight, and so now the Chinese chestnut is being planted. The tree, as it's growing in the spring and summer, will produce husks. Here are some tiny husks just getting started, middle of July. They're about the size of a large marble, but by the end of the summer they'll produce a sharp, spiny husk, similar to a large walnut, but instead of having a smooth, mushy green or black shell of a walnut, it'll be spiny. I've had some kindergartners, when I show them this, describe them as porcupine eggs, which is a pretty good description. Inside the husk, when it cracks open, there'll be 2 or 3 of the nut meats, and they're fairly large sized, like a large marble. Very thin shell, very easy to shell out, and then you have a large piece of nut meat inside there to work with and to cook. So Chinese chestnuts and American chestnuts are some that will grow in this area. Like the persimmon, you want to plant them in a sheltered area, good moist soils. The chestnut tree will probably get to be maybe 30 feet tall in this area for Chinese chestnuts. One recommendation I would make is not to plant this in your front yard or in an area where you're going to be mowing, because in the fall these husks can be very troublesome and annoying in your yard. So Chinese chestnut is one to try if you want to try grow some nut meats. The next tree we have on our virtual tour of the Northeast Arboretum is the Ginkgo. This tree is unusual. Like the Dawn Redwood, it's considered a living fossil. At one time it was thought to be extinct, and then they found some remnant specimens in some Chinese locations, temples, and they started propagating those, and now it's planted around the world. It can handle our winters really well here, but again, I would put it in more of a protected site than out in the open. The unusual thing about the Ginkgo is not only the age of how long it's been on this planet, but also it is the only species in its genus. And so very few, if any, insect disease problems have evolved with this tree. The leaf is a very distinct shape also. It's somewhat of a fan shape. And for centuries, humans have been using the Ginkgo for medicinal purposes. They'll use the leaves, they'll grind up the leaves. Also, they'll take the fruit and they'll utilize the fruit. You would not want the fruit in your yard as a landscape tree, just because when the fruit does get ripe, the pulpy outer flesh does get fairly rancid smelling. And so in the nursery trade, usually they're selling the male clones, and these trees will not produce the fruit. But Ginkgo biloba is the Ginkgo tree. The last unusual tree that I wanted to show on our virtual tour of the Northeast Arboretum is the Japanese Emperor Oak. And I chose this tree to represent our oak collection that we have. The unusual thing about this tree is just the uniqueness of the availability. The Nebraska Statewide Arboretum is where I got this oak species, but it's kind of difficult to find in the nursery trade. The other unusual thing about this tree is the large leaves. The leaves will almost be the size of a catalpa leaf or some of our other large leafed trees, but for an oak leaf, that's very large. And so people see this leaf and they don't realize that it's actually an oak tree. This tree will get to be about 40 feet tall. It gets a fairly wide spread on it, as you can see by the shape of the tree, and doesn't really have a lot of insect or pest problems. I think the leaves are hard and leathery enough to where it doesn't have the insects feeding on it. I hope you've enjoyed our virtual tour of the Northeast Arboretum. We gave you a quick look at some of the more unusual trees that we have growing out here at the Haskell Ag Lab. I encourage you to come out and visit the Arboretum, spring, summer, fall, or winter, see what's growing out here, and see what type of trees and plants you can incorporate in your landscape in Northeast Nebraska.